Good evening. Want to welcome you here. Glad to see everybody here for dinner with the doctor. Sorry, the lecture is starting just a little bit late, but hope you have gained some benefit from the health screening. If you didn't complete it before, those stations will be opened after our program, so you can do the health screening or complete it then if you didn't finish the process. So it's been quite a year. We love doing dinner with the doctor at this church, but it's been over a year since we've done one, thanks to COVID. And COVID's new in our world, and I guess I'm new in town as well. I moved here from Michigan last year, and I love working with Pastor Wayne, who retired, and a whole great team here. So we appreciate people who make these programs available. Dorleen, Maloney, and a great crew that's in the kitchen. They'll be doing a demonstration later. Lucas and a bunch of them with Total Health Spokane that have helped organize the stations with the health screening, so we appreciate everybody that's doing that. It's the goal of our church to promote good health and body. Jesus was here, he healed people, and he taught, and so in our church we try to follow his example in combining both, and so we are going to have a very beneficial health lecture here tonight. A couple things. You probably got here this American Prophecy little flyer when you came in. You may get one in your mail. So this is an event that is starting this Friday, and I'll be the presenter for that. We're holding it because a lot of people in the world are having more questions than ever about what's happening. And so they wonder if COVID-19 is in the Bible. There is a word called pestilence, but there's other signs that Jesus gave about his second coming as well. And even people that aren't of faith have this sort of sense today that the world's kind of slipping, and it's definitely feeling less secure and unpredictable. And so we are really going to be examining Bible prophecy and what the Bible says about superpowers such as America. And so I invite you out this Friday evening at 6:45 for our first session, and we'll have a few others as well, as you can see there on the flyer. Tonight we have the lecture notes here. Did anybody miss getting these when you came in? If so, you can hold up your hand and they'll bring you one. Okay, so we have one up on the front row. And another thing quite a few may have not gotten is this flyer that says 8 weeks to wellness. Did any of you not get this? If you hold your hand up, they'll bring you one. We have volunteers in town that provide a free health service, health coaching. So if you received any news during your, hold up your hand, this blue flyer, you can sign up online for free health coaching. And our health coaches would love to work with you. So there we go. There's a couple in the back as well. The health coaches work with health issues that can be addressed with lifestyle adjustments. And so if you received any news during your health screening of areas where you can make some adjustments, a health coach is especially in those areas of our life that are rather difficult to make adjustments. So tonight we're glad to have Robin here with us, Robin Dennison. She's been working in Dr. John Torquato's clinic for the last several months, and she is completing her family nurse practitioner. She's graduating this Friday, so congratulations to you from Simmons University. And she's sharing our health lecture here tonight. And so tune in. You'll learn some great things. We are in a church, and I'd like to begin with prayer this evening. If you'll bow your heads and ask that God will be with us tonight. Heavenly Father, thank you that we can be together here on this beautiful evening, and that our hearts would be open to beneficial things that you want to teach us, and that we can take good care of our bodies, and that we can be ready for any place you want to take us down the road. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Sorry about that. Testing. You guys can hear me? Let's try this one. Can you hear me on this one? Testing, testing. All right. This will keep me grounded, I guess. I won't be able to move away from my stand here. That's okay. Just in the back, you guys, if you stop being able to hear me, just give me a thumbs down or thumbs up. Are we good? All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for being patient with us. Yes, my name is Robin. Thank you for the introduction, Pastor Joe. And thank each one of you for coming this evening. It's a beautiful evening outside. I'm sure you could be sitting on your porch enjoying some lemonade, but you've taken the initiative to come here, learn a little bit more about your health. Like Joe said, if you weren't able to get the free health screening after the lecture, you'll have an opportunity for that, as well as a delicious meal, is my understanding, has been prepared for us so that we can enjoy that together. So yeah, just to get started here, hopefully each one of you got the outline. You can kind of follow along. It does not have everything that's going to be in my slides today, but I wanted to leave you with something that you could take home. I have a lot of information to share with you this evening, and so hopefully that will be just some of the highlights that you can take home with you and be able to review in your own time. All right, great. So for our agenda today, in preparing for this lecture, I did want to introduce a little bit more of my background. I've been a registered nurse for 10 years. Before that, I actually have a degree in biology. I love science. I love asking questions and finding answers, but I really missed people. So after obtaining my bachelor's in biology, I went back to school to get my nursing license. I missed people. I wanted to help people. And so I spent 10 years in the hospital setting. I've been in the intensive care unit, mostly in the emergency department. There, I started to see a lot of people, with a lot of the same diseases and coming in with similar complaints and just describing that they couldn't, get beyond their heart failure or their diabetes. And I was in rural settings where I'd see them multiple times a week or a few times a month. And I just started to have this passion and yearning to want to help people stay out of the hospital as much as possible. I also kind of went on my own health journey, exploring different types of eating and exercise and foods and, just trying to do what I could do for myself. And I've noticed such a, one second, we'll do questions and answers. I noticed such a, oh, I have to fix it. Okay, one moment, we're going to fix the mic. You're good. Thanks. Okay. One moment while we have technical difficulties with my hair. No, just kidding. Testing. You want? Testing, testing. No. Oh, can you guys hear me okay now? Oh. Yes, better? Thank you. That's what you're raising your hand for. Thank you. Okay, where was I? I learned what a provider, the role of a provider can be for someone, and a good provider. Someone who's willing to listen to a patient, someone who's willing to explore, hearing where people are at with their health, and helping them explore where they want to go. And so following behind the lead of someone like Dr. Torquato, many of you might know, I've had the benefit for the last few months to learn with him and Pastor Joe of having opportunities like this to speak with people. I just am floored to enter into this realm of becoming a provider. And so this is my first lecture, so thank you for your grace, and hopefully we can learn a lot. On that note, with what we have all been through the last year or so, I personally felt compelled to, with this opportunity, I was frustrated, as many of you might have been as well, that we were told with this new disease of COVID that all we could do for the first little while was just sit at home, or just, kind of wait until you're sick enough to go to the hospital. And I thought, well, there's been a lot of research out there and many, many years of things that we can do to boost our health at least. Like, why can't we be talking about that? So as I dug into the research and looked for those things, I thought, I want people to feel empowered that there is good data out there of the things we can do. And I want to share some of that with you this evening. But the problem is, as I dug into this, I found that I was overwhelmed. There is so much. As you start to go here and find out about how to boost your immune system, you start to learn of many other things. And I was going down rabbit holes, and I had probably, we're doing dinner with the doctor. I probably had enough lectures for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner for you guys today. So I tried to condense all that down, and hopefully we can just fly through this. But so stick with me. I have a lot on the slides. Mostly, hopefully, I can just present it to you. So if you get lost in a lot of words, that's for me. And at the end of all this, we'll just do a short question and answer. So first off, I don't also want to leave you on the edge of your seat. I will start by saying I'm going to stick with things that hopefully also that we all have in common, which is our health. I know that there's a lot of questions regarding the vaccination at this time. I'm going to stick with the stuff that data showed me that I can share with you that I'm confident in. I will briefly touch base on the vaccines, but I definitely want to keep us unified this evening. I know many people have different opinions on that, so I'll touch briefly at the end about the vaccinations, but overall, I hope that this is just more of an introduction, and maybe we'll be able to address more things as more research shows us more tangible evidence of facts. So to begin, don't know how much of you have any experience in research or evidence, or there's a lot of hearsay, there's a lot of different types of articles and things out there. So I just want to start by saying there's a hierarchy of scientific evidence here. So on this slide you can see, there's different types of studies at the bottom, and as you move your way up this hierarchy, the epitome of what you want to look for when you're wondering, is this article accurate? You're going to hear of what's called a randomized control trial. And basically that's where you have a group of people, and they're either going to get no intervention, an intervention, and out of all of those people, it's random. And often it's random for the people who are testing and for the people themselves. So you're not going to know what's going to shake out. This is truly a test of 50 people, 100,000 people. And so look for what's called a randomized controlled trial if you're looking for real solid evidence. And then the top of the pinnacle is this called systematic review or meta-analysis. And that's basically a study design. It can take a lot of these randomized controlled trials, or just it's just basically deriving conclusions based on that data. So you'll be seeing some of those terms later. I want to encourage you you've heard flatten the curve. Well, let's flatten the infodemic curve. Basically, I just want to steer away from, this whole idea of, well, this person said this and this person said that, and soon you get this really wide amount of information. But let's really stick to, anytime we're sharing information with people, let's take a look at what's accurate. Has this been verified by other sources? What authority? Ask yourself, under whose authority? Who wrote this exactly? Objectivity, it's like the object, basically the source. It's going to have more quality, and it's not going to be as biased. And then of course currency, it's going to be is it more current or is it 20 years old? So just a few things to ask yourself when you're looking at research. Okay, so in order to talk about our health, I feel like we almost need to get one of those big macro cameras and zoom in. We need to know what's happening inside, not just with organs and stuff, but let's go even further in. We're going to go macro. We're going to talk about the cellular function here. So our immune system is comprised of lots of little tiny cells, and I loved this picture because they truly, each one is so special and so unique, and they each have a role. And these cells work with tissues and organs together to fight infection. Many things trigger our immune system as well. We think first tonight, obviously, we're talking about COVID, we think infection, but so any kind of pathogen, but also inflammation, autoimmune diseases, they can trigger these cells to just fly to the site of infection or to create inflammation systemically. So that's what can trigger our immune system, and then these guys are kind of almost like your military. They're coming to protect your body from the disease or fight infection or anything that we have going on. Another term is called cytokines. It's another type of cell. Cytokines are just these little proteins that are important to signal our immune system. So they're not necessarily fighting, but they're telling other cells to get going. The thing you might hear a term, cytokine storm, that's one of those conditions, unfortunately, that we'll talk about later with COVID, that can really lead you into needing to be hospitalized and further treatment. A second aspect of the immune system that I want to touch base on is the two different phases. This will be important later as well. You have an innate immunity and your adaptive. The innate immunity is what happens during the first few hours. It's part of how our body protects itself with our skin, mucous membranes, and some of those first cells that arrive to fight the infection. The second part is adaptive immunity. And often that's the cells where they create the antibodies, so our body can recognize. It almost works like how vaccines work. Our body starts to recognize, and then it creates memory cells, so that if we ever face that infection again, our body's like, hey, I've got this, and it's able to fight the infection a lot sooner and a lot quicker, or prevent. So there's risks of depressed immunity. Unfortunately, as we age, our immune system does tend to decline, especially the innate, that early response. Obviously, also, any kind of toxins that we're exposed to. If we have any excessive weight, our diet, chronic diseases, and obviously stress. So, what I want to focus on, though, is boosting our immune system. So we do want to decrease stress on our immune system, and we can do that through lifestyle methods and supplements that we're going to talk more about. One last thing on the immune system that I want to point out are interferons. And I love these guys. These are cells. They're proteins that are actually secreted by a cell. When the virus enters a cell, these interferons get released, and they go to do several different things. First, it signals other cells. It says, hey, stop replicating. If you get infected, don't recreate yourself. It tells other cells to just, hey, just destroy yourself. It ain't worth it. Like, we can recreate more of you, but let's not recreate this guy. And then it's also going to activate immune cells. So interferons are a really important part of our immune system, and unfortunately, COVID-19, they've found is their secret tactical weapon is to actually attack interferons. So that's why we're seeing such a problem in being able to build ourselves up to protect ourselves against COVID. Kind of a busy slide, but again, just stick with me here. If anything, just check out this guy. So he is unhappy because he has chronic inflammation going on. So an overworked, chronically overstressed body. Anyone have any stress in your life? Are any of us American in here? I know lots of us have a lot of chronic overwork stress in our life, and unfortunately that will lead to a weakened immune system, which I almost want to say will, but can, I'll give it can, but probably will lead to some kind of disease or illness. Chronic inflammation, however, is a condition that where either trauma or diet's high in fat, or sugar, especially if you're already overweight, low sex hormones, so as we age we have lower estrogen and testosterone that can normally protect us against this inflammation, and obviously smoking or alcohol or any kind of lifestyle choices that are negative, and poor sleeping habits, all those things lead our bodies to a chronic inflammatory state. Being in this chronic inflammatory state gives rise to things called like metabolic syndrome, arthritis, believe it or not, Alzheimer's, asthma and allergies that get worse, ulcerative colitis or inflammatory bowel disease, different types of cancers, cardiovascular disease. It's just a no good thing. So whatever we can do, if you hear this can lead you to chronic inflammation, hey, let's stay away from that, and let's protect our bodies from inflammation. So we'll go into that a little more as well. Diabetes is a condition where they're kind of trying to figure out if does Does the inflammation make the diabetes worse, or is the diabetes making the inflammation worse, or they kind of feed off of each other? If you're diabetic, this is something to really pay important mind to. If you're diabetic, this chronic inflammatory state from being overstressed and not boosting your immune system, your possibility of having potential worsening complications such as cardiovascular disease and chronic kidney disease and amputations, your risk is driving up high, and it'll drive up quick. So let's protect ourselves. Just be in mind, if you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, just keep in mind we want to try to protect ourselves from this chronic inflammatory state. If we're a little overweight, I know some of us have taken our BMI this evening. Cytokines, those cells that are kind of okay because they come to that inflammatory rescue, they unfortunately, though, they remain elevated in our fat tissue. So that can propitiate you to getting into that cytokine storm than if you get COVID. As well as with obesity, vitamin D levels, which we'll be talking about, they're inaccessible because they get stored in the fat tissue. So, boosting our immune system. Can we do that? What does that take? I don't know if there's any history buffs in the room, but there's actually some really good evidence, even from the 18th, 19th centuries, that there are ways to boost our immune system. So before our common treatment methods that we have, what did people typically use? Well, we saw hyperthermia, with hydrotherapy and nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, fresh air, and rest. We saw these things being utilized. None of us probably heard of the 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic until COVID. I don't know about many of you, but when COVID came around, that's the first time I ever heard of it. There was a scientist, and he started to notice that some of the Army hospitals were having differences in the outcomes of their patients compared to some sanitariums that were over in New England. And so he did a study of over 450 people. And what he found was that the people in the Army hospitals, 16% of them ended up with pneumonia, but only 2% at the sanitarium. So there's a massive decrease. And he's thinking, I wonder what the Army's doing compared to what the sanitariums are doing. Well, the sanitariums of that time were known for utilizing a lot of hard work. The nurses, the staff, they were keeping these people, if they had a fever, they'd be, keeping them cool with some rags, making sure they had plenty of water, rest. They were just hand and foot, just serving these people. The Army hospitals, they didn't have the staff to do it, and as much as they tried to treat it with aspirin. They were trying to drive down that fever and trying to keep these people, honestly, more comfortable. I don't know about you, but when I have a fever or I don't feel well, I take ibuprofen or Tylenol because I don't like the aches and pains. I don't like the shivers. I want to be comfortable, so I reach for that bottle right away. But there's something that he noticed, that these people that weren't taking the medication but were relying on a more natural treatment modalities had lower risk of obtaining pneumonia, which also shakes out to a lower risk of dying from the pneumonia. So the infection fatality rate was around 6.4% versus 1%. So there was a decrease. A second thing in history I found interesting was neurosyphilis being treated with malaria. So there was an Austrian neuropsychiatrist who won the Nobel Prize in 1927 for his work. He noticed a lot of his patients that had neurosyphilis, they weren't getting better, people were dying. So he thought, I wonder if I inoculate these people with malaria, shoot up their temperature, give them all fevers, if that fever will kill the syphilis, and then I can treat them with malaria, because at the time they had the treatment for that, which was quinine. And he did it, and they got better. So interesting phenomenon there. But then penicillin was created in 1928, which I am thankful for antibiotics. They have their place, absolutely. But it really shifted our focus, I think, in how we treated things. And I think we've lost, that hard-won, proof that some of these other things were working at the time. So, to boost our immunity, should we allow a fever? Fever, by definition, is a temperature of 100.4 or more. Now, if you get that temperature of 103, 104, it is shown that brain damage can occur at 104 or lingering temperatures for too long. But it is our body's natural process. Like when our body notes that infection, it wants to, it wants to help your cells do what they need to do. So it goes through what's called increasing its set point. I never knew this. I got to thinking, what creates our bodies to suddenly jack up the temperature? How do we get really hot all of a sudden? Well, there's a little part in our brain that's a little thermostat, and it's set at 98.6 degrees. And if you think about it, that's really quite amazing. Whether we're swimming in a cold lake or laying out in the hot sun in Mexico, we're pretty much always at a regular temperature. Our body does this amazing thing. But if we get infected by something, our body recognizes, I need to do something quick. And so in the brain, that little temperature guy, I think of a guy that says, hey, I'm just going to turn up the thermostat in here. And he goes up and he says, I'm going to set my temperature to 101. I got to get this going. And what happens is it creates vasodilation all the way through your body, so that's why you get hot and sweaty, and then it tells your muscles to shiver, which creates a massive release of heat. So I found that pretty interesting. But so multiple studies are showing that when this process begins, all of a sudden, you remember that picture of all those little tiny cells? Those cells, your natural killer cells and your cytokines and interferons, they're released, boosting your immune system. So a lot of people have asked, hey, can we increase our temperature somehow? That way we could increase our immune system if we suddenly get all these cells working for us. Why not? It's kind of a low risk. It's not taking away treatment from someone else. There could be potential big gain. So they decided to take a closer look at this. So this is called hydrotherapy and boosting our interferons. So they did an induced hypothermia study. They immersed a bunch of people in 103 degree temperature, so a more warmer temperature, hot. And then they took blood samples several hours later, and they did find 10-fold increase in these interferons. So sure enough, go sit yourself in a hot sauna for 20 or 30 minutes, and as a way to boost your immune system. Or, what's also been talked about is doing hot showers. And some people, I don't know have any of you heard of doing a cold shower? Yeah, so, and you can alternate that. And I've heard of that, but I thought, where's the data? Is that real? Is that true? And so I went looking, and I did find that. So cold hydrotherapy is the second one here. And it's a common misconception. My grandma, God bless her, she used to tell me, don't go out or else outside without your jacket or else you'll catch a cold. But believe it or not, short, brief periods of cold exposure can boost your immune system as well. So there was a study. They took two groups of athletes, so people that are used to changes and temperatures and their body needing to use oxygen in different ways, and they said, hey, I'm going to put one group of these athletes in this passive immunity. I'm going to put them in a hot heat tank. It's a hot water bath for an hour. And in this group of people, I'm going to make them exercise and get their blood stimulated and get them hot in that way. And then he took both groups of those people and put them in a cold immersion. And sure enough, guess what they found? An increase in those cells, the natural killer cells and your interferons. So many studies also show with this cold therapy that finishing a hot shower 30 to 60 seconds, so it doesn't have to be too painful, but just 30 to 60, 90 seconds actually showed a decrease in sick days. It showed an increase in energy and a decrease in depression. So if you struggle with any of that, or if you just want to keep your sick days for your vacation time instead, and they're even trying to figure out, is it more of a mental thing? If it is, that's okay. They think maybe cold showers make us stronger people. So what can we do to boost our immune system now? This is what will be on your outline as well. We want to be proactive. So some of the things we've talked about, hydrotherapy, using that hot and cold water. We're going to go more into the next few things. Vitamin D, zinc, magnesium, and something called NAC or N-acetylcysteine, sleep, exercise and diet, managing your stress like we talked about, disease management like we talked about. And the overall goal is reducing those cytokines. Don't want that cytokine storm. We don't want that inflammation, and just restore our natural immunity. I did find a study that also went over some things, and this is in your notes, the garlic, astragalus, mushroom extracts, green tea, zinc, and vitamin C are shown to do that as well. So let's talk about sleep. How many of you get at least 7 hours of sleep a night? Oh, yeah, emphatic. Very good. Good. Very good. That's good to see. So it is essential for immune health, and so do what you can to get some good sleep. Fragmented, insufficient, it can and will have a profound impact on your viral immunity. How do we get good sleep if we're not getting good sleep? Do I have any recommendations for you? Well, of course, I came prepared. Early exposure to light in the day, believe it or not. So sleeping in till 10 or 11, you might not work so well. Get yourself used to a rhythm. Whereas the sun starts to come up, you get those early morning rays. There's something about how it hits the back of your retina. It actually prepares you for sleep later on at night. Get outside, go for a walk, or sit by a window, and allow the rays of sun. You don't have to look directly at the sun, but allow the rays of sun to passively get to you, and it will prepare you for a better circadian rhythm. Obviously, you've probably heard reducing your light exposure at night, so things like TV, cell phones, iPads, the things that we're all very guilty and addicted to at times. Put it away for at least an hour before your bedtime. Also, the hours of sleep before midnight have been shown to be worth double. I don't know how they figured that, but try it. If you could get to sleep 9, or so instead of 11, the way that you can feel in the morning, I've tried it. I tend to feel more rested and ready for the day. Melatonin, in studies have been shown actually is a very powerful antioxidant. The thing you want to be careful with melatonin, our body naturally produces melatonin at night to prepare ourselves to sleep. You don't want to take this on an everyday basis because, believe it or not, it would tell our bodies to stop producing melatonin, and we don't want to do that. But in periods of like acute illness or stress, or if you just traveled and you have some jet lag, it's okay to help your body by just taking about 3 to 5 milligrams a night for a few nights to help establish your rhythm of sleep. Next, exercise. So studies have shown that 150 minutes per week, which only equates to 22 minutes a day, is enough exercise to prevent ourselves from having, to help encourage, I should say, not prevent, but better immune function. How many of you do you think could fit 22 minutes a day in to your schedule for exercise? 22 minutes? If you're lacking or unable, guess what? You could do 22 minutes and break it up. They've found that even if you do 10 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at noon, and 10 minutes in the evening, it's just as good as a full 22-minute session. So I just want to encourage each of you, if you haven't had the time, or if you just can't seem to fit it into your day due to scheduling reasons or whatever, try to just do 10 minutes, 5 minutes here and there, and that is just as good. Research shows that it does boost your immune function, it reduces that inflammation, and it increases your pulmonary and cardiovascular health. Kaiser Permanente did a huge study, 50,000 people with COVID-19. And they studied if these people met this 22-minute-a-day goal of moderate to vigorous activity, it showed significantly lower incidence of severe COVID. So just this 22 minutes a day, whether or not you've had COVID before, this will prevent you from having a more severe outcome if you end up getting COVID. And as we know, sedentary behavior, none of our doctors like to hear if we're sedentary, and that is because it's a negative risk factor for many different diseases and illnesses. Vitamin D. We're here in northern Washington, northern Idaho area. Do you think we get enough vitamin D here? The last couple of weeks have been beautiful, absolutely, and today, we've been very fortunate to have some nice spring weather. So vitamin D, we think often, we've probably heard that vitamin D is really good for building strong bones, but something I started to read into and I was so fascinated by vitamin D, and I spent a lot of time researching it, so I hope that you benefit from this tonight. So vitamin D, it's a fat-soluble vitamin. We have fat and water-soluble, so a lot of people say you can get toxic if you overdo it. We'll go into that in a minute. But so it's fat-soluble, And we get it through the reaction of UVB lights from the sun that into our skin. There's an interaction that occurs with some of the cells, and it gets converted to a form and stored in our liver and fatty tissues. But it's not just a vitamin, it's actually a steroid hormone. So it plays many key roles in our body. It can help regulate blood pressure, helps our calcium and bone development. It helps modulate your innate and that adaptive immune system responses and the regulation of cell growth. Did you know that every cell in our body actually has a vitamin D receptor? Every cell. And over 2,000 genes in our body can be controlled by the influence of vitamin D. So vitamin D is way more important than we've realized. This should have been what has been being talked about. This can and will help boost your immune health. It can be obtained by dietary sources such as salmon, mushrooms, fortified food, but most importantly, it's a lot of times needing to be supplemented. And I'll have some facts for you in a minute. So they say here about 70% of the world is deficient with vitamin D. 70 to 80% of all Americans. They did what's called the TILDA study that was over in Ireland. Ireland's just a little further north of us where we're at. And they found that 47%, so almost half of people over 85 were deficient and 30% over 70. So even though just a little further north, we're still seeing staggering numbers that are deficient. What do I mean by deficient? Over here on the left. I don't know if any of you have ever had your vitamin D levels drawn. It's not a typical one that's covered by insurance in America. You have to pay cash for it, whether you have private insurance or Medicare, Medicaid. Unfortunately, we have to pay out of pocket for this one. Do we need the level? Not necessarily. We can almost kind of assume a lot of us are either deficient or insufficient at this point. Having a supplement isn't a bad idea, and I'll go into that in a minute. But here's, if you kind of wanted to know the numbers, we call deficient less than 30. Insufficient is 30 to 50, but sufficient, kind of our goal, is 50 to 250. And I don't know about you, but the more I learned about how important vitamin D is, I kind of want to be on the higher end of the spectrum. I don't want to be teetering on the line. So some risk factors for vitamin D deficiency: race and ethnicity. The darker the skin you are, the less ability you have to absorb as much as you need. Increase in BMI, like we talked about. If you're overweight, even if you had enough vitamin D supplementation, sometimes it just gets stored in the fat. So decreasing your fat stores will help increase your vitamin D levels. Elderly, and then sunscreen. Anything that blocks that UVB light. There's UVA, UVB. So believe it or not, if you stand in front of a glass or if you have sunscreen, you're not getting the same UVB light that's important to help you get vitamin D. But also you want to be safe, of course, no getting sunburned. Lack of sun, and then above the 35th parallel, and I have a map to show you what that looks like here in just a minute. So vitamin D3 is critical, especially for us here in the north, from October through March. And I just wanted to point out some associated diseases with vitamin D deficiency are things like mental health, infections, allergic diseases and autoimmune, muscle pains, and different skin conditions. So here's a picture of the 37th parallel. So anything above that, they say you must supplement vitamin D. So I think most of you probably live above that unless you get a snowbird in the winter down to Arizona. So consider, please, supplementing vitamin D at least throughout the winter. So vitamin D levels and immunity, how does this impact our immune response? There was a study of, once again, that randomized control trial, study of a lot of people, so we can trust that this is a good source, 190,000 people. And they found that there was a strong inverse relationship of, so people that had low vitamin D, less than 50, associated with an increase in COVID positive patients. And it didn't have to do with your latitude, your race, your ethnicity, your sex, or your age. So this literally was a direct correlation between low vitamin D, the higher chance you had at having COVID positive. And the relationship really is anticipated because vitamin D has such numerous abilities in affecting the innate and adaptive immune response. So supplementation, once again, busy slide, but I put it in your notes. They found that 4,000 international units per day is more the upper limit for anyone over 9 years old that you can take without a doctor's prescription. And again, this is kind of interesting, the timing. If you're taking vitamin D already, keep taking it. If you haven't though, and you come down with COVID, they did what's called, there was a shade study, and all these again are listed in your notes. They took 40 people that were vitamin D deficient, which meant again those levels of less than 20. And they gave them 60,000 international units a day for 7 days. That sounds like a lot. It is. It's not something you probably want to do forever. And 50% of those people, they reached that goal level of 50 by day 7. So it goes to show, yeah, like you can do a boost just to get up to that level. And what they found is while they were giving them that supplementation, they tested their blood levels every day to see, are we seeing any changes in that COVID RNA, and are we seeing any of those inflammatory markers change? What they found was by supplementing the group that they supplemented the vitamin D with, they had faster clearance of the COVID RNA and a decrease in those inflammatory markers. And they found no toxicity and no adverse effects. Once again, we were talking about that toxicity since it's a fat-soluble vitamin and not water-soluble. The Mayo Clinic did another really good study of 20,000 patients, and they supplemented anywhere from the 5 to 55,000 a day. So once again, we're actually above what's recommended. And only one person out of 20,000 people had an adverse effect, but they actually had a predisposition to something related to that. So pretty much out of 20,000 people, everyone was safe. No toxicity was observed. Just something to note, there's not a linear response. So if you take 1,000 a day, don't think just because you'll take 5,000 a day or 20,000 a day that you're just going to continue to get this increase. Take just a moderate amount every day, and it builds over time. And it increases slowly. So typically, if you're deficient, what your provider will do is retest within, don't be surprised if he says, hey, don't come back for 4 to 8 weeks. That's normal. It's not like an antibiotic where you build up to a therapeutic level within a couple days. The other thing to note, magnesium and zinc, these are also factors in vitamin D absorption, and Americans, they think, are about 80% deficient in magnesium and 70% in zinc. Okay, the question was taking vitamin D morning and night versus all at one time. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I would have to look into that. Good question, though. Some more supplements that I found in the research was N-acetylcysteine, zinc, and vitamin C. The NAC, or NAC is what I'll call it, it's actually a really cheap supplement. It's been FDA approved for a long time. It's a powerful, potent antioxidant. It has anti-inflammatory effects, immune modulating characteristics, and they think it could benefit the treatment of COVID. It's very low toxicity, if any, very low risk. So once again, it's kind of one of those, kind of why not? They did a study with people that had COVID-19, and they found that administering it, even with other antiviral agents, it would reduce hospital admission and ventilation and mortality. So that seems like a pretty powerful one to consider. So taking 600 milligrams twice a day during the winter months is what's been recommended. Zinc has been long studied as well. And I don't know if any of you, have you tried those little zinc lozenges if you've ever started to get a cold? I feel like they work pretty good. As soon as I start to feel like my immune system's kind of down, those cold ease zinc lozenges, or even a supplement in pill form, I feel like I didn't get sick. This is the first time this year. It may be the everything else that we've been doing, but I feel like zinc really just kind of takes that edge off. But research does show that zinc they've done it in prior trials with just colds, which is a viral, illness, kind of like a coronavirus. It actually shortens the cold by 3 days. So taking up to 40 milligrams a day, but no more, because it can reduce your copper, which is another important element in your body, and only for short term. This is important. Sometimes it's been seen to affect people's liver function tests, so only take your zinc for short term. And then vitamin C, we all love our vitamin C. I would definitely feel better with taking vitamin C, so it will improve your immune response. It's a powerful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and they say you can take up to 2 to 8 grams per day short term. Once again, if you have any kidney failure or anything, you want to run this by your doctor. So can you have too much of a good thing? That's unfortunate in this life. The truth is, usually you can. So our immune system, is super powerful and amazing, but those little cytokines that we talked about, those are those cells that regulate the immune response, but in overproduction, that cytokine storm, that's what we don't want, and that can cause shock, multi-organ failure, and even death. So we definitely don't want that. And supplements, I did run into this, and it's on your paper. Elderberry is a known powerful, it's supposed to be good for immune system, but they did note that it inhibits replication and viral attachment of other coronaviruses. This has not been studied with COVID-19 yet. And they think it's more effective in the prevention or early stages of an infection. It can increase those silly cytokines. So they suggest if you start to feel ill, maybe discontinuing that for the time that you're ill. It's maybe something that just to take it during those winter months that you may be more susceptible to different viruses. This is confusing. Same thing with vitamin D was shown. Very interesting. It can also increase some of these inflammatory cytokines. So once again, if it's okay to use with caution, but maybe just think of discontinuing it during an illness. And that's probably also why when if you're in the hospital with COVID, they're probably not administering vitamin D at that time. That would be why. And echinacea is another really popular one, and I found kind of similar things. It can increase these inflammatory cytokines, so maybe just be wary with those 3. So we're all here to learn about COVID, I guess, so we better talk about it. This is kind of a slide that goes over something I think we're all very familiar, but just so that we're on the same page. We know that COVID-19 is an infectious disease that is also known as SARS, or Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. It's actually the second time that we've had a pandemic. The first one was in 2002, which was just known as SARS, but that was quickly contained. COVID-19 is standing for the coronavirus-19 because it was found in Wuhan, China in 2019. Manifests as that lower respiratory illness, but it can impact many other organs, as we've seen. Perplexing symptoms. Some people have nothing, some people have it all. There's a wide range of symptoms, and it's very confusing. Hence the severe complications that we've all been aware of, and we all want to be careful to recognize early and to treat early, but those things that can also lead to pneumonia, sepsis, ARDS, or kidney failure, that cytokine storm, even death, unfortunately. Treatments, though, like we started to talk about at first, currently just involve symptom management and supportive care. The mortality varies by region, and the recent data shows that 20% do go on to need some form of hospitalization. We do know it's spread by droplet. That's why the masking, is still a thing, and it probably will be for an unknown amount of time. And it's true, though, that as people cough, those droplets get spread to people near you, and then just like if someone was smoking a cigarette in the next room, you eventually can smell the lingering smell of a cigarette. It's airborne. It's a tiny particle. Just like that smoke can travel, COVID-19 can travel and become airborne as well. So a mask, does protect against that. And then obviously hygiene and surfaces in contact. What's interesting that I didn't know about COVID-19 is there's 2 phases. You have an early phase and a late phase for some people. And the difference of that is typically marked by the development of pneumonia. So the people that tend to get worse are the ones that will need hospitalized because they're probably developing some form of pneumonia. But I really want to emphasize this is not a one case fits all. These different phases, as we've witnessed in our friends and family and heard on the news, This causes a major treatment dilemma for providers because the pathophysiology of this disease, with having these different early and late phases, it's going to really depend on where you're at in that phase and what your other health risks are. This is a new disease. They had to be really innovative at first, so a lot of drugs were tried at first, and that kind of just stuck in our mind. But now we're finding that those drugs aren't as effective for certain people or at certain phases of the disease. So if one friend says, hey, my doctor gave me this, well, you know, I know we all kind of want to get on the bandwagon and try to get the same good stuff, but it might not be applicable for us. So for instance, steroids were used right at first, but they are shown we don't want to use those. We don't want to suppress our immune system right at first. Let's let our immune system do what it can in those early stages. Let's use steroids later when we need to decrease that cytokine storm, decrease that inflammation that's making people need to be hospitalized. And same thing with like antiviral therapy. We want those antiviral therapies working right at first. You know, so some people thought that they were treating them in the hospital for way later. Now we're moving that part earlier. And as I mentioned earlier, COVID-19, unfortunately, it has this signature tactic, this weapon. It's attacking our interferons that are trying to interfere with the COVID. There was a really neat study that I ran into that 24% of these really severely affected people by COVID that were hospitalized, 14% of them actually had genetic mutations to the interferons, and 10% of them had antibodies actually built up against their own interferons. So COVID somehow is coming along, and it's either mutating the gene of the interferons and or helping the body create antibodies to its own defense system. So it's, you know, it's really unfortunate. It's suppressing the ability of that innate immune system, that happens in the first few hours with those interferons, to mount a response. So what can we do if we become COVID positive? Is there any research that shows that we can help boost our immune system then? Believe it or not, the things that we have talked about, yes, of course, those things that we've talked about can boost our immune system. Those things such as that hydrotherapy, hot, cold showers, using saunas for 20, 30 minutes, exercise, good sleep, managing your stress, your diet, increasing your vegetables, all the things we've heard our whole life, there is shown to help once you're COVID positive. Reducing those cytokines, the things we talked about earlier as well, that's, you know, think of that inflammation. We want to drive those cytokines down. We want to keep our inflammation at a minimum. Another thing I want to suggest, you all probably have seen there on the right, it's called a pulse oximeter, and it's something that, you know, put on your finger when you go to the doctor and they give you a certain % of oxygen. You can actually get those on Amazon. Or, you know, anywhere, like where you could, if you don't want to support Amazon, you know, a different store. What you want to do, most people, we want to be above 94%. That's that number. We're in the green. We're doing good. But if you're starting to feel kind of short of breath, it's nice to have one of those at home. You can get them for, I think, $20. And you can monitor yourself. And if you're feeling short of breath or a loved one, you can check their oxygen saturation at home. And you can say, hey, you know, you're at 93%. I'm gonna kind of watch you. Or, hey, now you're kind of getting down to 90%. They suggest you should go to the ER if you're at less than 90%. Obviously, though, some of us have some COPD or other things that might drive our baseline oxygenation lower than that. So if you're on oxygen or you know that you're normally living lower, but then you make a decrease from your baseline, that's also a warning sign that maybe something internally, that pulse oximetry is one of the first things to tell us that you're maybe moving from that early to late phase of COVID and having more severe complications. The other thing I wanted to make mention of to self-treat if you're COVID positive, of course, is preventing the spread. Ventilation, fresh air. Open the windows of your house, and if you're the sick one, lock your door, but keep your window open. Put on some more warm clothes. Give yourself your own hyperthermia. You know, get yourself really hot foot bath, hot wet towels, but open that window, get that fresh air in and out. Filtration, HEPA filters remove 99.97%. So you can actually get a HEPA filter and toss it onto a fan at home, and that can help filter the air, as well as just your housing, the filtration system in your house. MERV-13 is the level for homes, and that can remove 80 to 90%. So there's just ways to keep the germs in your own home from being decreased, and isolate yourself if you're sick and mask appropriately. It's my understanding, I had to buy these for my house recently for your air filtration system for your house. It's kind of like the rating system for your filters. Prescription treatments. So again, I had mentioned many of us have heard maybe from friends that have been hospitalized or from friends that have been treated if they had COVID of some prescription treatments. And so I just want to touch base on some of these because some people may have gotten them and then you go to ask your doctor and that doctor won't give them to you. Well, there's a reason probably why. But also I know a lot of doctors don't know it all, and there's so much information out there and it's ever changing. So it's important that we are informed, that we know what these things are and the why we could need them or who they're for, who we could recommend them to. So monoclonal antibodies, really neat. They're actually man-made proteins and they function like our own antibodies that help fight viruses. They took a study of 467 positive COVID people. They gave it to them, but they only had mild or moderate symptoms. They weren't sick enough for these to make much of a difference. But for COVID positive people that are at risk for that progression into that late stage, that's where they saw a lot of good results using these monoclonal antibodies. It's also very expensive and it's only given in the IV form, so you'd have to be in the hospital anyway for it. But what they're doing is they see a patient that maybe might progress. They're COVID positive, let's say they're overweight, diabetic, and have heart failure, have different risk factors that they're gonna, if they're COVID positive and it's their first day or two and they're in the hospital, if our hospitals have the ability to give these monoclonal antibodies, we should be giving it to them. And a lot of times they're giving it to them and discharging them out of the ER, and that prevents that person from progressing to that late stage. But they have to catch them in that early stage. So that's why it's important to know how you're feeling. It's important to know if you have these risk factors, and if you do, or your parent or a loved one that has these risk factors, let's ask our hospitals, ask our local providers if they're offering these monoclonal antibodies, because they're worth it from progressing into that later stages of COVID. Some of these risk factors, for instance, all you need is one of these. If you have a BMI over 35, if you have chronic kidney disease, if you're diabetic, if you have any kind of immunosuppressive disease, or if you're over 65, you would be available to take these monoclonal antibodies. Or if you're over 55, as well as with cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, or COPD. And there's a few other things listed. So just to be aware that this should be available, and just know yourself. And again, this should be on your outline too, so you can look that up and say, hey doctor, what about these? Steroids is another prescription treatment. Again, only at the right point of the disease is it going to make sense, and that it's going to add survival benefit. And that's usually when you're at that hospital level, you're in that late stage of COVID, and you're requiring interventions. Hydroxychloroquine, or also known as Plaquenil, that was really popular at first. It's immunosuppressant. It treats lupus, arthritis. It's an antiparasitic. It treats malaria. The WHO, the World Health Organization, this is their current take on this. It's more decisive research is needed to assess its value in patients with mild disease, or as like a pre or post-exposure prophylaxis to patients exposed to COVID-19. The current data, though, doesn't show that it reduces deaths among hospitalized COVID patients, nor help people with that moderate disease. So this is still one that, like I said, things are ever changing, more data is needed, but this is just where we're at with that one right now. Remdesivir, that's a strong antiviral. One of those RCTs, or randomized controlled trials, also showed that it was superior to placebo, believe it or not. So it did help shorten the recovery time in adults who were hospitalized with COVID and had evidence of lower respiratory tract infections. But the problem with the remdesivir, it's expensive, it's an injection, and once again, timing is important. Ivermectin, this is a very well-known medication. Over 4 billion people worldwide have been treated with ivermectin since the 1980s. It's low cost, like 2 cents a dose. I even heard, I think India is how they've kept their numbers down, is they just did a mass prescription for everyone for Ivermectin. Very little adverse side effects. You can even take up to like 40 to 60 times the dose with hardly any problems. The off-label antiviral prophylaxis with early treatment for COVID. It's a hospital disease immune modifier, and it helps this, you've maybe heard of these long hauler post complications that some people have been having. They're thinking it could help with that as well. It was weird. It was controversial in the US. Of course, like a lot of things, the US, we got to make sure that we do the right thing. It's good. We got to have FDA approval for a lot of stuff. It was really controversial at first, but some doctors in certain states, I think Texas was one of them, started using it, and they actually saw 70 to 90% decrease in death rates. That's significant. So now the National Institute of Health has been a little more neutral since some of these results have been coming out, which is good. Overseas trials that were occurring on ivermectin. Israel did one of those randomized controlled trial studies. Once again, we can trust those. We saw a decrease in viral and replication setting time by half, and a decrease of the course and severity of COVID by 80 to 90%. Once again, super significant. In Argentina, similar things. They actually had 800 doctors and nurses who were treating COVID positive patients, and they gave them ivermectin kind of as like a prophylaxis. None of the 800 doctors or nurses got it, and the other people that didn't get it in this trial, 57% of them did get COVID positive, of these doctors and nurses. So once again, it seems like the numbers are there. So finding accurate data. How confident have you guys felt in understanding, is what I'm hearing the right thing? And this says this, and then they say that, and it's contradictory. Like, what do I do? I really want to empower you tonight to don't give up. There is a way to find good, accurate data. Vaccines, I know, like I said, are very controversial right now, and I'm not going to have a show of hands for who's gotten it, and I'm not going to ask or tell myself. But how it works, like I mentioned earlier, you have that innate versus the adaptive immunity, and what vaccines can do is, once you get a vaccine, it helps teach your cells how to remember, and it helps you have a better immune response if you do come in contact with what you were just vaccinated against. That's the goal. But research and development, as I said, is changing rapidly. And individuals, we just have to perform our own research and know for ourselves and decide for ourselves what's right. So it's not hopeless. There are places to get accurate data. For this particular lecture, these are just some of the many places I went, but PubMed.gov, JAMA, NIH, BMJ, and CDC were some places that I got some of my research. But I think I wrote, I did put this on your outline. This doctor, Professor Roger Schultz, he owns the YouTube channel called Medscape. So if you have internet, I encourage you, go to YouTube, type in Medscape, and a ton of his videos come up. You'll recognize his face. In most of his videos, he's got kind of this outline of the blue and the yellow, so you'll see it right away. He's a 4-time board-certified internal medicine, critical care, pulmonary diseases, and sleep. So if you can't think of, I can't think of anyone else who would be an expert on COVID. Someone that knows ICU patients, someone that knows respiratory stuff, someone that has been in internal medicine. This guy, he's really easy to listen to, and he interviews a lot of people. People interview him, so you get to meet a lot of other people in the work. And then Rhonda Patrick was someone else that I found. She owns Found My Fitness. It's kind of a different approach. She's an American biochemist, so she's looking more on the scientific side of things, and she's done extensive research on aging, cancer, and nutrition. So she's someone that was really a proponent. I got a lot of my vitamin D and some of my supplement research from the data that she's found, or the people that some of her colleagues. So I just want to encourage you, don't be judgmental. It's very confusing for all of us. Even for me, it's taken me so long and a lot of sifting through a lot of research and a lot of headaches, but it's been really neat, and I felt really encouraged at the end that there are good numbers out there. There's good data to show us how we can take care of our bodies, and just boost our immune health and be prepared for anything that comes our way. So some common questions, and then we'll do a short question and answer time. So is COVID-19 more than just the flu? I hear this a lot in the clinic, and from friends and from family. And I do want to say, after working in the ER, I've been working in the ER my whole program for many years, and the short answer is yeah, COVID-19 is different. It looks different. People that come in, and whether you've had it or not, you've experienced this, when it gets severe, it's different. The images, the CT scans that I've seen, the people that normally that I actually knew them as a patient and they've been sick, and then I know them again, and with COVID, they do not look the same. They do not look good. Their respiratory status is horrible. And it's very scary. It's very severe. And there's devastating complications. There's long-term effects that we're seeing. Even to some of my younger vegan athlete friends that have gotten COVID, they're still having neurological issues. There's some athletes that are having things like myocarditis or inflammation of heart tissue. And that's for 6 months after the infection. So this is different. It's more than just the flu. To what extent, we don't know, but it is different. Do masks really work? Well, like I just briefly mentioned, masks do decrease the spread of droplets, which is how COVID is spread, and they do decrease the airborne particles if they're worn properly. So that's kind of it does, if you're sick, if you're spreading the virus, yes, masks do work. Will I have to get more vaccines? Like, let's say you got the COVID vaccination, do I have to get another one? We're hearing that the virus is mutating. There's a South African strain and a Brazilian strain and an American strain in the UK, and so far my understanding is, the UK strain is covered, but these other ones we don't know yet. We just simply don't know. Why don't kids seem to get sick? Well, kids, they do have a stronger immune system, and thank God, that we're not seeing our children have like some of these devastating complications. But we are seeing that they are having inflammatory complications and things that tend to show up later. So it's still something that we're learning more about. Another couple questions I had thought of or that I hear often, if I've had COVID, should I get the vaccine? That's still kind of a question. If you've had COVID, there's been studies that show you do have those antibodies still for some time. And so I should be protected for a while from that strain. But what about the vaccine? We're seeing antibodies still for about 6 months after the vaccine. Are we going to see it for longer, or for how? These are just questions we don't have answers to fully yet. And finally, how do I know if I've been exposed or if I'm already immune? And how long can I be immune for? We don't know. It's just, hopefully for a long time, but we don't know. This is ever changing, and we're in this together. So that's most of the common ones that come to our office in our clinic and that my friends have. So thank you so much for your attention this evening and coming to dinner with the doctor, caring about your health. And if you have any questions, I would be free to take them right now.
Just wait till I get the mic. There's a few people watching online, so there's one coming right there. We'll take a couple questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I hated to miss school. So if I started coming down with a cold, I used my bed as a trampoline and jumped and jumped and jumped until I broke out in a sweat, and I was good to go. Usually the next day. So that whole temperature thing, right?
Yeah, the temperature, getting hot. Did you go take a cold shower afterwards?
I don't think so.
Mental note for next time. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Yeah. Up here in the front? There's two over here.
Earlier in the pictures, you were showing how you should get about 20 minutes of exercise every day. But in the pictures, they were showing people your age. They didn't show any older people.
Yes.
So what about older people? How much should I get?
It is. They say for anyone of any age, believe it or not, it is 22 minutes a day. And that is anywhere, even just a moderate exercise. They said walking. You actually, just a good brisk walk can count towards that 20 minutes a day. There are some things known as chair exercises. And once again, if you have YouTube, even just sitting in your chair, believe it or not, and having some light weights and raising them overhead, using your arms, doing squats, doing garden work, any of that is activity. So definitely take that as an encouragement. Don't think that just because you're maybe a little older that you get to get away with no exercise. No, I'm just kidding. But even they did say in the research too that if you took your 22 minutes and for some of those younger people, if they wanted to decrease the amount of time of 22 minutes of walking, they said 11 minutes of a good run was shown to be just as effective. So. And bike riding. Yep, anything, absolutely. Good. Another question.
I tried to find some ivermectin just to have it on hand.
Yes.
And nobody has it over the counter except for North 40. And they have it for horses.
Yep.
So I figured, and I checked because I read how much you're supposed to take. And it's very little amount, and only for 5 days.
Yep.
And for, $5, you can get way more than you would ever need.
Yeah.
But you're probably going to say no to this, but is it okay to take that?
So I am not a doctor. I haven't graduated yet. Ask me Friday. I'm just kidding. I'm going to pass this one off to Dr. Torquato because I don't have the answer personally yet. I didn't look into the dosages, but maybe while he's answering your question, I can take a look here online as well. Unless you have the answer for us, Dr. Torquato.
I'll just share with you that my approach is that pet medicine is not human medicine.
Yeah.
And it's not the same purity. It's not the same quality. And when you start self-dosing something that you hope that will do a job, you take risk. And so we give ivermectin to our horses. I wouldn't, and our goats. I don't know that I'd pull up to one of those syringes and kind of, So I don't know that's a good idea. If you were overseas, that might be the only thing that you have access to. But I think you have a better chance if you have a physician that you can talk to and say, hey, look, I'd like to be able to do this. And there is easy access. It's not over the counter. It is a prescription in human doses. But there are those that would use that and would help you with that. So the answer is, well, you could, but probably not a great idea.
Yeah, some doctors just won't.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
Just to clarify, ivermectin, that has to be taken at the early stages, correct? Because I took it in the later stages and it didn't do anything for me. So I just want to clarify, it has to be taken in the early stage.
It's been shown to be more effective in the early stages. I went back to the slide here on ivermectin, but yeah, so they saw that 70 to 90% decrease in death rates if it was given early, more of prophylactic or within those early stages, yeah. So thanks for that.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Robin, for a great presentation.
Should I go sit down?
All right, we have some food that you can take to go, but before we do that, we're going to transition the screen here over to the kitchen, and Dorleen Mallard.
Good evening and welcome to our little demonstration too. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but in keeping with what we've just learned about immunity, we are going to present foods tonight that are the highest in immunity and the ones that you should be eating regularly. When you go tonight, you're going to be receiving a meal, and it's going to contain a burger. It's going to have a sauce The sauce, it has high immunity sunflower seeds, and then there's a cruciferous vegetable here, cauliflower that has been roasted. We have a healthy fat, avocado, and we have greens in the form of lettuce, and you're also going to see greens in another area here in just a minute. And topping it off, you're going to have a carrot cupcake that is totally sugar-free. Everything we have tonight is sugar-free and oil-free. And to top it off, we have some blueberries. And as you know, blueberries are something that, and any kind of berry, but in particular, blueberries are something that need to be consumed regularly. Okay, so we're going to be a little more specific now with the burgers. We started with beans. I have beans here that have been mashed and cooked and mashed. And to that, I'm going to add some rice. And you should have a recipe there so you can know that there are other options. These burgers are something that you can adapt to anything. Now, you don't have to use lettuce. You can use quinoa, and even potato works good. So we're going to mix up the beans and the lettuce. The rice, and that's mixed up. I'm going to start and adding some other things that you might not have expected to find in your burger. Okay, mushrooms are super. So we're going to put mushrooms in here. And we're using a green in the form of spinach. Okay? We need to consume lots of greens. And then onions and garlic is something that is really going to help you out. So in here I have the onions and the garlic. Okay, and then nuts, something that we also need to include. So I put all of these in here, and I'm going to pulse them. You need to pulse them or chop them. If you don't have a food processor, just chop them into very small pieces. Okay, got it. Now, you don't always have to have spinach. When in the summertime, when you don't know what to do with all the zucchini that's coming around, you can use zucchini. You can use carrots. Carrots work really well. You can use any type of bean you choose. Other options, I think, are listed in your recipe. Okay, we're going to mix it up. And then we're going to start adding the spices and things. Okay, I'm going to add some oats for binder. Again, you could add breadcrumbs, but we didn't know how many gluten-free people we would have, and everything we have is gluten-free. There are two items. The cauliflower is roasted in a coating, and it does have breadcrumbs, but we did make some that did not have breadcrumbs. So you have that option. So let us know when you come through to pick up your dish whether you need gluten-free or not. Okay, and same with the buns. We have some buns that are gluten-free. Okay, now we're going to add our seasonings. Again, you can take your seasonings any direction you want. And I'm going to start here with some nutritional yeast. And you can use a liquid in form of soy sauce. I'm using liquid aminos. You can use ketchup, barbecue sauce, anything like that. And again, the amount is according to what your tastes are. And in this situation, we have smoked paprika. You could choose the oreganos. You could go Hispanic and you could put in chili and cilantro or anything like that. So the smoked paprika, I'm going to use 2 teaspoons. Now we're going to need a little bit of liquid to get this stuff to stick together. And by the way, if you're using rice, you do need to use the short grain rice. And unfortunately, the burgers that you'll be receiving has the long grain, and the short grain does make it stick together better. Somehow the wrong rice got purchased and cooked. Okay? You can use any type of liquid to bind it together. I'm using a plant-based milk. Other things could be water, and one nice thing to use is vegetable stock, and it will give you more flavor. Okay, I'm going to put in about 2 to 3 teaspoons of that. Okay, we mix this together, and then if you like it crunchy on the outside, and yours that you will be receiving has been dipped in something crunchy, and I'll show you that. I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it together here. A nice way to form it into an even structure is to use a canning lid or something. Looks like I got a little too much. Okay, that gives you a nice shape. I can take this up, and if you like it crunchy, cornmeal. And while we're talking about corn, you know, you can also put corn in your patty. And then kind of roll it around and bake it for about 20 minutes. And since we did not use oil in any of our foods, we don't use oil to bake it, and we use either a silicone mat or parchment paper and to bake them. And so there you have it, and we want to welcome you by, and we'll be able to have these right here, and you can pick them up.
Thanks for coming out. So when you go out the door, you can go down the hall to complete your health screening if you didn't do that already. And if you go just slightly to the left there into our fellowship hall, you can pick up samples of this food, and you can take it to go. We do have a couple tables set up if you want to eat here, but this is how we've made it COVID friendly, and thanks for coming out tonight. God bless.